The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 1, The Fall. Chapter 19. Mila woke Tal up what seemed like only an hour or two later, though his sunstone said 7 hours had passed. She didn't say anything, but just dumped a pile of heavy furs on his stomach, which hurt. Obviously the furs were meant for him to wear. His sunstone could be used to keep him warm, but after it had gone dark the night before, Tal didn't want to draw any power from it unless he had to. The furs came in 3 distinct sets. Tal had to experiment with them for a while before he worked out that the light waist-length one with hanging ribbons went on first, then the leggings, which tied to the ribbons, then the knee-length coat that went over everything. Even after trying it a few different ways, Tal wasn't entirely sure that the outer coat wasn't on backward. Not that the ice carls seemed to care very much about how their clothes were worn. They were very scruffy compared to the Chosen, Tal thought. He was only wearing the furs because he didn't have a full-strength sunstone. Mila came back while Tal was struggling with the thick Sleigh skin gauntlets. She sniffed and helped him tie them onto his sleeves so they would be ready to wear and could not be dropped or lost. "We must be prepared to leave as soon as the afterguards report a break in the living sea," the ice carl girl said coldly. "Come on." Tal followed her, his shadow guard dutifully remaining behind him like a normal shadow. It had even expanded to match his increased size. He felt weird under all the fur. It was like suddenly becoming very fat, for he was at least half a stretch wider than he used to be. Even so, the broad Sleigh skin belt he wore seemed to have been made for someone twice that size again. It kept slipping down, though he'd drawn it through the bone buckle as tightly as he could. Obviously it was Mila's idea of a joke. She didn't want him to be comfortable. The ship was strangely still when Tal climbed out into the bright light of the sunstone high above on the mast. At first he couldn't work out why as he narrowed his eyes against the light. Then he saw that the ship wasn't moving. The sails were furled, and huge anchor ropes led over the stern and off into the darkness of the ice. The wind still howled through the rigging and cut at Tal's face. He pulled out the bone face mask Mila had given him and slipped it on. It didn't fit properly, with one eye hole too far to one side to see through clearly. Tal fiddled around with it for a while before giving up and slipping on his gauntlets. His fingernails were already turning blue. Mila went to the side and easily climbed over, disappearing from view. Tal followed clumsily, hitching at his belt. He hoped she hadn't just jumped down to the ice, because the deck was at least 8 stretches high. She might be able to jump down that far, but he knew he couldn't. She hadn't jumped. There was a ladder, another backbone of some kind, this time made with quite long side bones, or ribs. Tal climbed down after her, much more slowly than he normally would. There were quite a few ice carls already on the ice. 8 were returning from a hunting expedition, dragging a huge cube of bloody meat behind them. It was enormous, and Tal couldn't imagine what it had been carved out of. A Sleigh, perhaps. Another ice carl was holding the reins of the lead reska in a string of 6, harnessed to the cart thing Tal now knew was called a sleigh. The ice carl had to be Jorntil, who the crone had said would prepare the animals for them. As they approached, he touched his clenched fist to the hand that held the reins, in a fairly casual salute. Mila responded by clapping her clenched fists together hard enough to make Tal wince. He raised his sunstone and let out a small light, and it was Jorntil's turn to wince and look away. "Sorry," said Tal quickly. "I was trying to be—" "Get in the sleigh," hissed Mila. But Jorntil only blinked, laughed, and fed the lead reska something that looked like the Sleigh meat Tal had eaten aboard the ship. That made Tal realize he hadn't eaten breakfast, or whatever these strange people ate when they woke up. Tal didn't want to ask Mila about it and give her another chance to show off that she was tougher than he was. Instead, he climbed aboard the sleigh. It rocked as he pulled himself up, and Tal was surprised by how lightly constructed it was. Most of it was made of very thin bones woven together, and the whole contraption creaked as he shifted his weight. It didn't seem strong enough to carry him, let alone the 2 of them. To make matters worse, the part Tal was standing in didn't seem all that well connected to the 2 long, blade-like skates underneath. It was like a baby's bouncing basket, Tal thought, peering down. The 2 skates were solidly joined at the front and rear. The woven bone box he was in was precariously balanced between these supports, held up by 6 or 7 wide bands of Sleigh skin. These springs would absorb the shock of hitting small bumps and holes, at the cost of bouncing around. There were 2 spears and a whip and a long scabbard on the outside of the sleigh. For a moment Tal thought about grabbing one and throwing it at Mila, and had a daydream about making his escape. But he couldn't drive the Reska, and even with the Shadow Guard to point the way, he knew nothing about crossing the living sea. The triple cut on his wrist burned as he thought of this, but Tal hardly noticed. There was enough good reasons to put up with Mila for the moment. Later he would find a way to get rid of her. Mila jumped in, and the whole thing bounced even more. Tal, unprepared, fell against her, and she pushed him off. "Hang on," she said scornfully. She pulled a long whip out of a scabbard on the outside of the sleigh, and with a practiced flick cracked it out to one side, sending ice crystals flying. The Reska stirred in their traces and blew out their noses, sending jets of powdery snow all around. Mila cracked the whip to one side again, and then, in a fluid movement, sent it over the lead Reska's head. As it cracked, the Reska snorted even louder, and the sleigh gave a sudden lurch. "Ah-ha!" screamed Mila, nearly deafening Tal. The Reska responded by lurching forward, their shaggy legs and sharp 3-toed hooves driving against the ice. The sleigh rocked and picked up speed. "This is fun," said Tal, startled by how quickly the sleigh was moving. They were moving across the ice faster than he could run, almost as fast as he slid down the lawn tree slide back in the castle. "It is not fun," scowled Mila. "It is only a means of travel. We are on a serious quest. There is no time for fun." Tal didn't answer. Despite what Mila said, riding in the sleigh was fun. But the most important thing was that he was heading back to the castle. He had been diverted from his own quest, but it wasn't over. He would get a sunstone and become a full-fledged chosen. He would do it for his father, mother, Gref, and Kusi.